Thank you very much. And I would like to join the MC in welcoming all participants to this event, Scaling Up Business Action for Net Zero, Harnessing the Levers of Change. To kind of set the stage, I think you will all agree with me that the impacts of climate change are now felt in every region, and the impacts are really dramatic. They will require drastic action and really deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And these reductions are required across sectors and across regions. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, preventing the worst impacts of climate change by limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees will require carbon dioxide emissions to stop rising around 2025, to reduce by about 50% by 2030, and to reach net zero by 2050. And 2025, the first of those benchmarks, is really just 3 years away. It's just around the corner. So to achieve this, we really need all hands on deck. There is no question about that. We have to achieve dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in all sectors. And this relates to how energy is generated and how it's used. It relates to how goods and services are produced. It relates to how they're being transported, how transport operates, how buildings are built, heated and cooled, especially in this region. And we also need to see far-reaching changes in the industrial processes, especially in hard-to-abate sectors like cement, steel, and chemicals. So against this backdrop, this session will discuss how the drastic cuts that are really needed in emissions can be achieved. And we have some representatives of different sectors here today that we hope to engage in a discussion on the policy and the regulatory environment that will be needed to drive the transformations that we need, the tools also that are required to make faster progress, and how commitment-based initiatives, such as the Science-Based Target Initiative, can help to drive change. And in doing that, we'll take a view across supply chains. And I'm really very pleased that we have 4 very distinguished panelists here with me today. 2 of them are online and 2 of them are in the room. Asif Ibrahim, Suzanne Chong, Dr. Srikanya Yatib, and Alberto Carrillo Pineda. And I have a couple of questions for each of you. In addition, I would just like to encourage all of our participants online and those here in the room to also raise questions. I do think that the program allows for enough time for interaction towards the end. So to get ourselves started, I would like to ask Mr. Asif Ibrahim to come in first. Mr. Asif Ibrahim is the Vice Chairman of the New Age Industries. He's the former President of the Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also an Executive Council member of UNESCO's Sustainable Business Network, ESBN. So, Asif, as we just heard, emission reductions are needed not only at the organizational level, but really across the entire supply chains. And as companies race to decarbonize their operations, a key challenge facing the private sector is how to decarbonize supply chains and Scope 3 emissions. Given your experience in the textile and the garment sector, what are some of the factors that are driving the decarbonization of supply chains, and what are some of the challenges? Over to you.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, let me just give you one good example of how the factory itself or the organization itself in Bangladesh in the textile sector are being proactive. We have the most number of LEED certified green factories in Bangladesh. We have 53 platinum LEED certified. We have 105 gold, and then 10 silver and 4 which are in the process of certification, and 550 plus are in the pipeline. And now in terms of the supply chain, which is most important, because if you want to address the issue of Scope 3 emissions, it is important that we have the awareness created amongst the raw material suppliers of our industry. That also involves goods transport to sites, business travel also, then employee commuting, waste management, these are all part of the efforts that we need to address for upstream scope 3 emissions. And we can take proper action for decarbonization if we address them. Now, that was, the raw materials and employees and others coming in. But what about after you have produced and you're shipping those goods to the destination? So goods transport to customers and consumers are also very important. And there also we must look at the downstream scope 3 emission, how we can address that. The main contributions of organizations that they could make to lower their emission and improve their material mix, for example, in the textile sector, is through greater use of recycled fiber, which we do not do enough. We also need to increase our use of sustainable transport, maybe electric vehicles or electric buses when we commute our workers. We have to improve the product packaging. That is also an area where there can be tremendous improvements. For example, in the textile sector, the finished goods you have to ship in cartons and hangers. Now there is technology that the hangers can be recycled and also the cartons can be recycled. So those are the areas that we need to focus on. We also need to focus on decarbonizing our retail operations. I think that is also a very important aspect. And one of the most critical aspect is to reduce the overproduction. Because in the clothing and textile sector, you see that only 60% of garments that are currently being sold across the world are without a markdown. So this is a worry. We have to ensure that the correct amount is ordered that is matched with the customer demand so that we can reduce the overproduction. And if we follow all these measures, we could actually achieve 308 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent abatement in the year 2030, which is the end of our SDG target goals. Though Scope 3 reporting are not standard practice among many organizations today, Scope 3 accounting is becoming more and more mature and widely adopted measure for emission reduction measurement. Research indicates that 5.5 times more emissions actually come from the supply chain alone. So any organizations that's serious about decarbonization should report, account, and reduce Scope 3 emissions. Some of the factors that contribute to decarbonization of the supply chain for level 1 companies, I would say, is public relations. There needs to be more awareness about doing the right thing with regards to the supply chain, minimizing bad publicity so that the damage to the main company is limited. There has to be effort on savings, efficiency, and cost cutting. There has to be an effort for having a competitive advantage and market positioning through differentiation. And that differentiation can be how the company manages its supply chain. For example, Gucci is a company that is actually working on financing the supply chain so that the SME supply chain so that they can improve their sustainability in operations. So more and more companies, if they invest in the supply chain, having finance made accessible to them, we know that there are many of these funds like the GCF, which are available. If these companies can tag those funds with their supply chain, those supply chain can itself become, try and make an effort to become carbon neutral. Apart from that, I think, right now, other issues that they can work at is to have a consensus and demonstration of best practices. Some of the good examples that are there that can be scaled up amongst the countries through the business chambers and associations, more and more workshop and conferences for awareness dissemination. And also, I think one needs to address the issue of risk. Risk is high instance of GHG supply chain emission, and the publication of the risk can be a bad impact. We already know that many of the companies in the West who source textiles from Bangladesh, they face a lot of bad press, and they're also always under pressure from the civil society organizations, labor unions, and NGOs for their actions. So it is the responsibility of these big companies, multinational companies, to ensure that they take this risk very seriously and they understand that the potential failure to achieve sufficiently low levels of net emissions has potential side adverse effects. So the risk should also act like a driver for these companies to decarbonize their supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for providing some very concrete examples of how this transformation could be driven forward. But I want to zoom in. You spoke about Gucci and what the big companies should be doing. But let's talk a little bit more about small and medium scale enterprises, because they really form the bulk of enterprises. They also need to be part of this transformation, right? So what can these companies do to reduce their scope 3 and supply chain emissions? And do small and medium scale enterprises have enough capacity to understand and lower their emissions? What are some of their challenges?
Okay, very good question, moderator, because for most multinational organizations, the climate impacts from doing business do not originated from their own operations, but actually from their suppliers. And most of these suppliers, they're SMEs. Multinationals have more than 10,000 suppliers. This can seem an impossible mission to manage them. But there are some ways of scaling up reduction of scope 3 emissions, particularly amongst the SME suppliers in the supply chain. Number one is to understand supply chain context and climate impacts. That can be done through screening the emissions of supply chain by working with general members, such as spending on volumes of goods purchased multiplied by emission factors. I don't know if many companies do that. This can help to create a general understanding of the supply chain carbon footprint. It will also help to identify the suppliers with the largest carbon exposure. Number two is through engaging with stakeholders. Setting a target goes hand in hand with setting a strategy for involving partners. So by creating dialogues around sustainability, we can create mutual benefits for collaborating organizations. And buying companies can provide financial support, as I mentioned, the Gucci example, resources or information to help suppliers meet their goals. We can encourage the supply chain for increasing their efficiency and reducing waste. It can be more efficient materials and equipments that can be used for multiple purposes can be given access to the supply chain. The supply chain can be encouraged to reuse and recycle the resources. There are many examples. For example, starting from the e-waste is also an area that needs to be addressed. I don't think enough is being done in those areas. Tons of papers are being produced unnecessarily. So that is also an area where encouragement can be given. Setting sustainability targets is also area where the supply chain can be encouraged. And some punitive measures can also be, because you have the upper hand because you're buying from them. So if you, sort of put some sort of a pressure on them to set the sustainability targets, report those targets to the mainstream company, that can also help achieve the goal. But the biggest problem, as I mentioned, is the capacity of the SME. So financing is very, very important for the SMEs. And the Gucci example is a good example that the multinational companies can actually finance their supply chain, access those funds. And if they do that, then perhaps these small companies, can make an effort to do that. There's a figure that says that these businesses are making efforts to cut their greenhouse gas emissions through actions like reducing energy consumption and waste. 82% is that. Employee education is 64%, and upgrades of facilities and equipment is 52%. But once again, awareness creation, financing them, putting some sort of a target, a measurable target. If you want to do business with us, this is what you have to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asif. I think you really set the stage very nicely and provided us with this perspective. And from the perspective of small and medium scale enterprises, now let's go to the multinationals. I have a speaker online from the private sector, Ms. Suzanne Chung, who is joining from Hong Kong. And I just check that there she is, exactly. Then is a corporate member of the Hong Kong Institute of Environmental Impact Assessment and the Hong Kong Institute of Qualified Environmental Professionals, and has over 12 years in senior positions across NGOs in the private sector, covering areas such as waste management, green purchasing, environmentally preferable products, as well as climate change. And she's currently the head of public affairs, communications, and sustainability at Swire Coca-Cola Hong Kong, where she's leading the Swire Coca-Cola Hong Kong sustainability strategy and initiatives on the planet, product, and people. So let's hear from you. And what I would like to ask you to address is, firstly, it is evident that meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement really requires a coordinated effort from all sectors, including the private sector, to scale up ambition and action. And I think we can say that the private sector is responding. There are a couple of initiatives that are being driven by the private sector, such as the Climate Pledge, the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, Green Deal for Business, the Net Zero Alliance, and so on. So from your perspective, what is driving business action? And how is the private sector translating these initiatives to action on the ground in your respective regions and markets? And perhaps you could also address how some of the challenges and bottlenecks in scaling up ambition you could also address some of the challenges and bottlenecks in scaling up ambition in the private sector, and what, in your opinion, government and business and civil society could play together in scaling up private sector ambition. Over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you, ESCAP, to inviting Swire Coca-Cola to share our experience as a private sector in combating climate change. Most of you already know that the Coca-Cola company is global beverage giant. I want to give you a little bit of context what Swire Coca-Cola is. We are the 5th largest bottling partner of the Coca-Cola company, serving over 8 billion populations. We cover 6 markets, include parts of Chinese mainland, US, Cambodia, Vietnam, the whole of Hong Kong, as well as whole of Taiwan. Hong Kong is our home market and model market as well, where we serve 7 million population. Can we have the next slide, please? Sustainability is not window dressing for us. For our stakeholder, we include key stakeholder include government, consumer, customers to investors, especially at market level, because we are such a big partner of the Coca-Cola system. Our stakeholder expected us to maintain a social license to operate. For us, our sustainability challenges covers not only climate change, but also the use of plastics, use of water, aspects like gender equalities, health and wellness. And to that, Swire Coca-Cola and Coca-Cola have made bold commitments towards 2030, just like a lot of private companies. Next slide, please. Climate is one of the key focus under the 3 pillars in planet, the middle one. We have the other planets, including product and people. To understand what our footprint is and what the hotspots are, we conduct an in-depth research back in 2018, which is where our base years for, to benchmark our improvements and efforts. Like a lot of consumer-facing industries, Scope 3 contributes our biggest footprint at 91%. And on the left, you will see the hotspot identified based on our value chain pillars. On the left, you can see the biggest one, which is the dark blue one, that is our packaging, followed by our cold drinks equipment like vending machine at 25%, whereas the last of the top 3 is our ingredients, which constitute about 20% of our whole carbon footprint. Having a clear information on our own carbon footprint really helps us to set our strategy and prioritize our initiatives. Next slide, please. With endorsement and working closely with the Science-Based Target, we have set ambitious carbon reduction targets accordingly, which include Scope 1 and 2, absolute reductions of 70%, Scope 1, 2, and 3, absolute reductions of 30%. In addition, we pledge to purchase 100% of renewable electricity for our markets by 2026. We start with areas that we have best control of. Obviously, it's within our core operations. Apart from working on energy efficiency, which is the bottom left corner, we've identified 3 areas that we have to work very closely with to reduce our carbon footprint. That include compressed air and chilling, which is a very big part of our operation, P-form manufacturing, which is blowing of our bottles, plastic bottles in particular, and fueling operations. And also the energy we produce, we try to be renewable. Within our Chinese operation, whereby we are able to access or produce ourselves renewable energy, we do so. In particularly in 4 of our bottling plants, we achieve a great percentage of renewable energy, either by procure or produce on site. And 3 of them already achieve 100% renewable energy. We also work with the government and the market to try to identify renewable energy source for our trucks. Our green logistics in Chinese mainland constitute 10% of our operations. In Hong Kong, where I am working right now, we are a small market. We constitute only 3% of our total carbon footprint. Having said so, we try to do where we could. We do restrict it by Hong Kong's natural environment and the current policies that we cannot use a lot of renewable energy locally. So we focus ourselves into packaging innovation to reduce our carbon footprint, which I'm going to talk about it later. Next slide, please. Apart from policy, and obviously natural environment that offers green alternative. As mentioned earlier, capital investments will be a major challenge to make the step change. Just an illustration from our US counterpart. Our US market make up 13% of our carbon footprint. To that, our Utah, which is the headquarters of our US market, try to build a very large 3,000 kilowatt on-site PV system, which make up about 5% of reductions in scope 1 and 2 for our US operations. But we need a very big investment. And for that, we need to get support and funding to bridge the gap and ask our head office, the Swire Pacific, for such investment makeup. Next slide, please. To find out the bottlenecks for Hong Kong, we try to look into packaging because other areas we might have lesser of step change in terms of carbon reduction. The packaging make up over 30% of our carbon footprint, so we pledge to use different, more environmental friendly alternatives, which covers packageless option. The bottom left corner is our innovation in Hong Kong, whereby we use vending machines to vend water without package. So this is a very new thing in our system, whereby in Hong Kong there is no proper licensing requirement to facilitate those installation. And each of the station, for example, we need to use 2 months to get it approved, which is a very long process for vending machines. Obviously, with COVID, our customers may be a bit wary about placing those stations into their properties. Also, consumer habit will be our challenge. WWF have done, and Hong Kong have done a survey not long ago, a few years back, and say only 8% of the people carry their own bottles. Recycled content is a very key thing for us to do carbon reduction. And we have put effort in terms of procuring recycled PET, which is a key ingredient for our plastic bottles. In Hong Kong, we can do so. Unfortunately, in Chinese mainland, currently using recycled content in food-grade products is prohibited. We'd like to see them there will be a breakthrough in future. Also, recycled plastic had a much higher cost differences compared to virgin plastic right now. So at the moment in Hong Kong, there is no sort of initiative, financing initiative for manufacturers like us to compensate the cost differences. Also, design for recycling is a very important thing for manufacturers from industry perspective as well, because if manufacturers not designed for recycling, the rest of the industry will just produce bottles that might not be end up in the food grade recycling industry. For that, we actually invested food grade recycling facilities in Hong Kong. So we also want the government to try to have policy to support design for recycling. Industry collaboration, apart from industry collaboration, the importance of having the right policy for producer responsibility scheme also as important to drive right incentive and the cost and scale up collections for different markets. Next slide, please. Educating our customer is important, but supply chain even greater. For that, we actually produce a 6 steps process for our suppliers management, from engagement, alignment, mapping, measurement, reporting to benchmarking. Also, having the right technology in terms of products is very important to us. The second largest carbon footprint for our pillars within our value chains is our cold drinks equipment. In the past, in Hong Kong, finding those commercial drinks equipment that use low global warming potential is actually very difficult. And as a very large supplier, we can negotiate with our suppliers to do so. But it's a very long gone process because sometimes we need government support in terms of mandating the use of environmental friendly refrigerants. That will be helping our industry a lot better. That's my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susanne. It was really very interesting to see how you translate into action on the ground. I would like to get back to a question that I think is also quite interesting, and that is, while you've described the very high level of ambition from your perspective, what are some of the challenges and bottlenecks to the private sector in scaling up ambition further?
Sorry, I can't quite hear the last question. Can you repeat, please?
From your perspective, what are some of the challenges and bottlenecks in scaling up ambition in the private sector?
Certainly in Asia, I think particularly for our industry, having the whole circular economy build up is very, very, very important. Though the sort of recycled content being allowed in Hong Kong, as I mentioned, having the right collection infrastructure and collecting the food grade plastic in Asia is still have a lot of room to grow, and particularly in Hong Kong. And that's why we try to invest with our stakeholders in Hong Kong the first food grade PET, which is our bottles plastic recycling facilities. And our experience shows getting those food grade plastic ready require a lot of education. The design has to be right. The bottles itself has to be designed for recycling that don't know contaminant. The industry have to collaborate with them. The government has a very key role on that. Hong Kong currently do not have producer responsibility scheme, and we try to advocate a cost-effective manner that do right separation and the right incentive for different parties to collect the right bottles for recycling, so we can do the best way of circular economy. So this is a very key part. Also, I mentioned earlier, our cold drinks equipment also uses a lot of refrigerants, which got high carbon emissions, both from the usage of electricity as well as obviously the adoption of the right refrigerants. In Hong Kong, the current regulations doesn't really mandate companies like us to do that. We try to do that ourselves, but we need government support in terms of financing or in terms of introduction or even grading it, because at the moment commercial refrigeration doesn't have an energy efficiency grading system in Hong Kong, so we have no reference to reference on. That will be really helpful, particularly for smaller companies who are our stakeholders, but they don't have the right know-how or even the scale to identify the right suppliers to do that. So we see that there's a lot of collaborations from both government in terms of policy and regulations, our industry in terms of collaborations and educating each other, particularly over supply chain, as well as introduction of the right product and services in Hong Kong.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And one of the things that you had mentioned on one of your slides was the need to have the right investment and funding, which brings me to our next speaker, who is Dr. Srikanya Yatip, the Secretary General of the Government Pension Fund of Thailand. Dr. Yatip has been at the forefront of responsible investing in Thailand and played a crucial role in integrating ESG framework and the OECD responsible business conduct into the government pension fund investment processes. So let's hear from you. We have seen various reports indicating that trillions of dollars of investment are needed to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And then on the other side, we often hear that not enough investment is flowing into climate change solutions and driving green investment. Then the finance sector often states that these trillions are available, but they're not enough bankable projects. How are pension funds and investors working to channel finance to address climate change and sustainable development? Over to you.
Thank you, Katinka. The question is sound like a very easy and simple question, but the answer is very complicated actually. So let me tell you from the standpoint of long-term investor like us, it's a simple equation actually. It's a story about supply and demand. I think investors like us, institutional investors who invest for long-term, they all agree that it's our job to do something for social return. So we definitely look for something, sustainable investment. We are looking for that. To answer your question, why we don't invest that much to those projects, let me tell you that's how we do invest. In order to invest in sustainable for sustainability, we do in three ways, simple ways. The first thing is we invest in entities or in companies or in debt, public debt or private debt that spell out that they are dedicated for sustainability. This is something simple and easy. This is how we are doing that. It's easy. The second way is we do it through ETF. So then we rely on some entities, some companies who would combine something into ETF products and tell us, hey, we have this sustainability product. Are you interested? If they sound good, then we invest. I will quote one sample, a sample of ETF for city for infrastructure, smart city infrastructure. So this ETF would track and invest in the companies or in whatever project that would dedicate to smart city. So it would be their job to monitor everything, whether they are providing a good city solution, efficient transportation, better accessibility, blah, blah, blah. To me, the first two products that we are investing don't do much in terms of contributing to sustainability. To do a great job in investing in sustainability, to my opinion, you have to invest in infrastructure. Because infrastructure is something you do for real in the city or in the country that need that. Then why is the problem? Why we don't invest in those infrastructure projects as much as we want to do? Let me tell you the limitation. One of the limitation is about the cost of investment. You have to understand that if you want to invest in infrastructure in underdeveloped countries so that you help building the country to become better, or maybe engage more in the climate change whatsoever. The problem is the cost of investment is always higher than the cost of investment in normal project. I have checked the document from OECD, and it said that if you want to invest in Nigeria power sector, the cost of investment of deliver the good and cost and everything is about 40% more than the cost of invest in normal infrastructure project. And if you want to invest in Mozambique, Kenya, for another example, the cost of transporting of like a 40-foot container from Mozambique, Kenya to Uganda, it would be like 4 times double the cost of doing transporting the same thing from Uganda, Dubai to Mombasa. That's the cost of investment that investors have to pay attention to. You have to understand that we are a pension fund. So our first duty is to produce financial return for our members. Even social return is important, but we cannot sacrifice financial returns for members to social return alone. We have to balance the 2 important points. That's the problems. How to solve the problems? In my opinion, to solve the problem is everybody involved in the country on a development. We have to develop what I would like to call it creating enabling environment. What does it mean by that? The enabling environment means that would be environment that would diminish the risks of investment, that would help mitigate the complexities of infrastructure investment, that would have to make sure that the infrastructure investment that we invest do produce the social return and investment returns. And what would be the things that can help developing the enabling environment? I would say that there would be a policy framework for investment that people involved have to pay attention to. The policy framework for investment, that could be like a checklist for the companies, for the countries, to develop key policy issues to facilitate and diminish those kind of risks. It could be investment policy, investment pollution facilitation, trade policy, competition policy, tax policy, public governance policy, corporate governance policy, all kind of policy that support investment, and all kind of policy that make sure that all the investment goes as it says from the beginning until the end of the day. And if that happens, I think when the products are offered to us, we would definitely consider, because we all agree that investment for social return is something that we have to act it now. It's not a job of somebody else, it's a job of everyone. And as a pension, we see ourselves as a universal owner. We invest all over the world. We own the investment all over the world. It's our responsibility to make the investment project that we're investing produce both financial returns for members and also social returns for the world. So that would be my first answer to your first question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting perspective indeed, and also very concrete in your recommendation on how to move forward from here. So how can government pension funds and other investment funds use their position to channel finance to address climate change?
I think first foremost, what you need to do, you have to set up your goal and you have to make it clear. This is your goal. This is where you want to go. In GPF, for example, we set up 3 goals. We make it clear that we want to develop, we want to support the goal 11, SDG 11, 12, and 13. When we say it clearly, what happened is company that want us to invest, we have to comply to those kind of goals. Example like the goals 11, sustainable city and communities. We make it clear that we want to invest in city and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So any company that can provide good health and well-being to the citizen, to the people, we are interested. Any company that care about life below water, life above water, we care to invest in those kind of things. The second goal that we pay attention to, and we've made clear that we want to invest in responsible consumption and production. Like Susanna said, Coca-Cola is interesting already because they already cares about consumption and production through either natural resource efficiency, cutting food waste, reducing waste, through prevention, reduction, recycling, reuse, whatsoever. So if we are clear about those kind of things, definitely we consider those company priority. And the last thing is SDGs 13 climate action. This is a must. This is something we must pay attention to, and we make it clear, GPF made it clear that SDG 13 is our priority. In order to invest in that, we make it clear that we want to invest in safe, affordable, sustainable transportation, sustainable source of food, nutrition, affordable, sustainable energy, those kind of things. So I think pension fund and investor, you have to make it clear which is the goal that you want to put more emphasis on. I think we cannot incorporate all kind of goal in one goals. So be specific. This is a 3 goal that GPF want to be specific. When we are specific in these 3 goals, our team investor and also our fund managers and investee and company that we want to invest in, they know this is what we see. And another thing I would like to mention is in order to comply to this kind of goal, make it happen, what we also need for the entity that invests is data and numbers. We want to understand how much we contribute to this kind of goals. So we want to be able to quantitatively quantify our achievement as well. So we're looking forward to data and number that we can integrate. As you all are in this business, you know that the reporting system of those company in this sustainability, they report differently. So it's become our big headache to compile those data into a single report of how much we achieve. So if that headache is supported by those companies, it would make our job much more easier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really happy that you mentioned the 2030 agenda and a couple of goals under the 2030 agenda, including its targets, because in a way that links us to the next speaker, who is Mr. Alberto Carrillo Pineda. Alberto is a co-founder and chief technical officer of the Science Based Targets Initiative, which is a voluntary initiative driving the adoption of climate targets in the corporate sector. Formerly, he led WWF's climate and business strategy at the global level as part of its global climate and energy initiative. Alberto combines 15 and more years of experience dedicated to climate and global environmental change and has worked in multiple settings, including global consulting firms and international NGOs. Alberto, there are an increasing number of entities from the private and public sector that are committing to decarbonizing their operations, as we've heard earlier today also, and also such that have adopted net zero targets. While commitments are obviously an important first step, how can we ensure that these targets translate into meaningful action? How does the Science Based Targets Initiative help companies translate commitments into action, help them understand, as our previous speaker said, what they're really achieving? Thanks. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and thanks everyone for your attention. So yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I would say definitely where I think is the next phase of the climate movement. I think we have gone through a process where, 10 years ago, people were still debating whether climate change was happening or not. And then, of course, that was settled, and then the focus shifted towards ambition. And I would say that's where we have spent the past few years. I would say, especially between the 5th assessment report of the IPCC in 2014, the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2015, and up to date, I would say the battlefront has been around ambition, right? And what we have done in the SBTI is to bring science as the benchmark for determining ambition at the non-state actor level, and to make sure that companies set targets that are consistent with the ambition needed to meet our global climate goals, and to recognize those companies that are taking action that is consistent with climate science. And we're not yet at the point where we can say that the battle has been won, because we have, for instance, in the SBTI, around 3,700 companies that have set targets or are in the process of setting science-based targets, which is impressive compared to where we were a few years ago. But these companies still represent only around 10% or less of global emissions. And I would say we have definitely still a lot of growth to happen in developing countries and also in hard-to-rate sectors. And so I would say we still have to really bring ambition to that part of the economy where we don't have it yet. But at the same time, we have already a critical mass of companies that already have the right ambition, and we need to start thinking about implementation, right? We need to move from ambition to action, and we need to make sure that companies focus on meaningful implementation actions that are transformational, that really help decarbonize the infrastructure that supports our economy. And that's where we see also the focus of the SBTI in the coming years. And so as part of this, I want to highlight two things. The first one is the monitoring, reporting, and verification framework that the SBTI is in the process of developing. We are currently running a survey to gather input from different stakeholders to assess what should be the direction of travel. Yeah, I think the idea is to create accountability mechanisms that basically incentivize companies to implement their targets, to fulfill their commitments, and also for us to make sure that there are robust ways to assess that companies are effectively decarbonizing, because I would say there's different levels of analysis. You can only look, for instance, at the data that companies disclose, and you could make determinations based on that, but the reality is that there are a lot of factors that affect the data that companies disclose, and so we need to have more in-depth assessment to understand what are the factors that are actually causing companies to report different data. Are there changes in the structure of the company? Are there changes in the methodology that companies use to report emissions? And yeah, there are many factors that can lead to this. And so we really need to go beyond just looking at data and really have a robust mechanism to assess decarbonization. And that's what we are focusing on in the SBTI. And I would say that's part of what we see key. The second part that I want to highlight is the need for policy to remove barriers for decarbonization and to really provide incentives that are needed to decarbonize across the entire economy. Because the reality is we face barriers, companies face barriers to decarbonize. I think the examples that we heard earlier today are a good example of that, right? And if there are not sufficient incentives from regulatory frameworks, but also from investors, from society, from consumers, then that makes it much more difficult for companies to decarbonize. Or if they feel pressure to decarbonize, then they may feel that they cannot overcome some of the barriers that they face, and then companies tend to look for alternatives that look good, but that may not be that transformational. And because of that, I think it's important to have also strong focus on removing the policy or removing the barriers and creating the incentives that enable companies to decarbonize, including strong regulatory frameworks, but also some of the other incentive mechanisms. So I think those are the main points that I would like to highlight.
Thank you very much. In a way, I'd like to circle back to our first speaker, perhaps, who had spoken about some of the challenges that especially small and medium scale enterprises face. So could I hear from you what you are doing, how the SBTI is engaging small and medium scale enterprises to build their capacities and enable them to adopt science-based targets?
Yes, I think that's definitely the challenge, and it was highlighted by the first speaker, also by the second speaker, where she illustrated that for the company, 90% of the emissions are in the supply chain, and that's what we observe across most companies. We have, in average, 11 times more emissions that are concentrated in the supply chain compared to the emissions that exist in direct operations. And so the reality is, for us to reach decarbonization at the global level, what we need for most companies is actually to figure out how to decarbonize their supply chain, right? And I would say for most sectors, the challenge is the same. We have some large companies, some large suppliers in the supply chain. Normally, those are working directly with also other large companies, tier one suppliers. And I would say those are the ones that are normally the low-hanging fruit for companies. Then we get into the difficult territory. And the difficult territory are two things. The first one is basically emission sources that happen upstream and that are usually linked to carbon-intensive commodities, either agricultural commodities or chemicals, plastics, cement, aluminum, depending on the industry. But we are talking about the commodities that are responsible for most of the emissions globally, and where companies don't have a direct relationship with the producers of those commodities. And so the challenge is, how can companies influence those companies upstream when they don't have a direct relationship, when they don't have direct data from those suppliers? And I would say we're currently, again, many of those activities are happening in jurisdictions where there are not sufficient incentives. And so that's one of the challenges that we face. And I would say there's a lot of initiatives working to create incentives, standards, and mechanisms to incentivize procurement of low carbon commodities. And I think that's part of what will help. And the second one is small and medium enterprises, right? And they constitute the majority of suppliers for a large number of companies. And also in most geographies in the world, they constitute the backbone of the business sector. And there, I think the challenge is about capacity building, also a challenge of aligned incentives, and also to identify the best way to enable companies in small and medium enterprises to decarbonize. In the SBTI, we introduced a simplified mechanism for small and medium enterprises a couple of years ago, and with the idea of making it easier for small and medium companies to set science-based targets. And we have seen a significant growth. And I would say a lot of this has been thanks to two things. The first one is companies working with their suppliers, companies incentivizing their supply chain to set science-based targets. And normally this involves, creating the incentives for them, procurement incentives, but also building capacity. And we have a growing number of companies. When we did our last progress report, we had over 100 companies that were already working with their suppliers to incentivize the adoption of science-based climate targets. And the second one is there's a number of initiatives also that are providing tools and capacity to enable small and medium enterprises to set ambitious climate targets, net zero targets. For instance, the SME Hub has around 9,000 companies already, small and medium enterprises, setting net zero targets, and they provide tools that companies can use to measure their emissions and to set targets. And so there's a lot of tools available, but I think, again, the challenge is the first step is for them to have the incentive, and that's where the supply chain amplification mechanism becomes critical. And I think we heard today about two great examples of how this is happening, and I hope that's going to be the way in which we will be able to scale from thousands to millions of companies joining this movement.
Thank you. And this last point that you mentioned, scaling up, is absolutely a most important point perhaps to agree on today. We are slowly getting to the end of our session, so I would like to encourage all participants, if you have questions to any of our panelists, to please put them into the chat so that we can make them aware. And as we get there, I would like to ask each of our panelists to very briefly, in 30 seconds if you can, describe one action that could collectively be taken by governments, businesses, and civil society. So by governments, businesses, and civil society to support decarbonization efforts in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. And if I may, I'll start again with you, Asif, and then take the same order as before. Over to you.
Thank you, Katinka. I would like to mention here you mentioned in your introduction the Asia Pacific Green Deal of Business, which has been endorsed by the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network. We have more than 100 business persons across Asia Pacific who are in our network, and we deal through task forces, very specific objectives. We have sustainable and inclusive finance, one of the task force, digital economy, one of the task force, disaster and climate risk reduction, which I chair. Then we have green economy and youth and women entrepreneurship. And all of our task forces, we have collectively endorsed this plan to encourage businesses across the region in the Asia Pacific through trade chambers and associations, and also collectively engage with governments in those respective countries by organizing workshops to adopt the Asia Pacific Green Deal of Business, where we have 5 pillars. The first one is advancing a zero carbon, affordable, and resilient energy system. The energy system must be decarbonized in accordance with the commitments of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, while providing reliable and affordable access to zero carbon energy for all. The second pillar of our Green Deal is building smart, low carbon, water secure, and climate resilient cities, infrastructure, and mobility. Greenhouse gas emissions from construction and operations of urban infrastructure and its activities, including buildings and transport infrastructure, must be reduced further, while water security and resilience to future crises are strengthened. The third pillar, which is very important, is mobilizing public and private finance for the green transformation. New investment must be directed to sustainable energy, infrastructure, logistics, food production, water supply, and other innovations for the greater new green economy. The fourth pillar is accelerating and scaling up innovations for sustainable development. Now is the time to implement new business models and solutions to improve efficiency, lower costs, and reduce environmental impact from the way we produce, consume, transport, work, trade, and conduct business. And the last one is changing towards a more circular economy. New circular production and consumption practices will bring new business and employment opportunities to maximize resource efficiency and minimize environmental impacts. We are very excited about this project that we have undertaken, and we have just endorsed it in the last Asia Pacific Business Forum. And this will be our primary driver for encouraging green transformation in business across Asia Pacific through our ESCAP Sustainable Business Network. So this is a good example that I can cite, which you asked for. Thank you.
Thank you for the roadmap that you've given us to move forward. Let's hear from Suzanne next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I have 3 words to share: policy, solution, change. It is all fit into each other. They're not they can be done by their own. What I meant is policy, obviously from government. If we really want substantial change, policy really help. I mentioned earlier, having some incentive, standards, requirement really help industry to guide where they're doing. For example, what sort of renewable energy we're going to have in Hong Kong? For example, is that solar? Is that hydrogen? That helps the industry to find solutions. When there is guidance, there is solutions. With areas such like green finance, investment can be put in the right solution development, whether it's today or tomorrow. That actually helps change. Actually, in terms of solution, when the solution came, people can change. Business can change. We can adapt. And then with this policy, it helps the companies to justify the change, and whereby the citizens, the whole civil society, can help change at the same time. On the other way around, a civil society can demand change, that change the company as well as the policy development. So 3 words.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. And then from there, let's hear from Kun Srikanya.
Okay, thank you. So I will take what Asif just said and Susan just said into my take. Because I agree to both of them, but I would like to put into the standpoint of investor. I agree to the idea of task force of each country. So if each country can develop like a community of task force, and those task force like connecting to each other based on the objective, and make it policy for the government or a policy holder. Those task force has to work together with those policy. Like I said earlier, that we need to have a enabling policy, a framework to support investors. So task force interesting. International interconnected task force would be even much more interesting. And then that should be in line with the government policy to support environment of investor. So what Susan just said, solution, I love the idea of solution very much, but I like to divide it into 2 kinds of solution. One is a social solution that we are talking right now. Another solution is investment solution. As I said, there's so many limitations in those projects or product. If you have solution for investor as well, that would be even great. And then it would come change, like Susan just said. Thank you.
Thank you also to you to taking the comments that have been made so far further. And with this, please let us hear from Alberto, also our 4th panelist.
Thank you. Well, I don't have 3. I have 2 words that I think are key. The first one is alignment, and the second one is collaboration. I think something that is clear as we try to move towards a zero carbon economy is the interdependence that exists to actually transform our economy, right? Governments want to implement more ambitious policy, but they cannot do it if there's resistance from the corporate sector. Corporates want to decarbonize, but they cannot do it if there is not sufficient finance, if there is no technology, if there is not policies. Companies want to decarbonize their supply chains or their business models, but they cannot do it if their suppliers also don't decarbonize. Financial institutions want to decarbonize their portfolios, but for that they need their underlying investees to also decarbonize, right? There's mutual interdependence across the entire system. And I think the first thing that we need to do is to align, to be clear that the goal that we have is to move towards a zero carbon, fossil-free economy in 1 generation, and the goal is clear. And the second one is to collaborate. That transition is very challenging, and we can only get there if we all collaborate to get to that goal.
Thank you, Alberto, for these very clear additional words. Can I just check whether there are any questions in the chat that we should raise to our panelists? I see a no there. Oops, sorry. So then there's a hand up there, 2 hands actually, 3 hands, excellent. Can you identify yourself and then hand over to your neighbor?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And also, it has been a good informative session to learn from various representatives about, how businesses are working towards a net zero target, given the current climate crisis that we are living in. My name is Praveen. I'm from Nepal. I am an indigenous human rights activist. I belong to Indigenous Newar group of Nepal. In my network, we have been supporting indigenous communities across Nepal affected by harmful hydropower development projects that are being undertaken without their free, prior, and informed consent. So in that context, given what we heard about the New Deal, also what we would like to recommend is that particularly large-scale hydropower projects should not be considered as renewable energy solutions in that Green New Deal. And that is also particularly when those projects are being undertaken without free, prior, and informed consent of the indigenous and local communities that they are displacing. Because it's not just about climate justice, it's also about social justice of the affected communities that we should be considering when we are talking about net zero. And at the same time, there's also scientific studies that are showing that hydropower projects or mega dams are also contributing greatly to the carbon emissions. So this is a recommendation again from the communities that I'm working with, from the partnership that we have with other communities. Large-scale hydropower projects cannot be considered renewable energy solutions when businesses are moving towards a Green New Deal. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take our questions first and then hand back over to our panelists. You, and then I'll hand over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Roby Halip with the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous Peoples. We're talking about net zero, no? But the shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, we know that it would again entail extraction. And this extraction of minerals like lithium and nickel will again entail environmental destruction in indigenous territories and human rights violation. Now, Alberto was mentioning a while ago about incentives, no? Incentives for businesses to decarbonize and also incentives for communities. I think for indigenous peoples, the biggest incentive here would be the respect and recognition of our rights, our right to self-determination, right to development, and right to free, prior, and informed consent, to have legal frameworks in place at the national level for the protection and respect of our rights, and also on the other end to support community-led renewable energy initiatives. There's a lot of them going on now and that are in line, no, with the right to self-determined development of indigenous peoples. I think in that way we can move forward together in achieving the net zero. Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Sukanya. I would like to thank you for your work in integrating ESG into the government pension funds of Thailand. I know how important it is to be balancing that financial aspect, but also to protect the lives of the people who are your core stakeholders. I have 2 questions. My first question is, how is your fund working with government to advocate for policies that will create that enabling environment to de-risk investment? For my second question, the Global Steering Group on Impact Investment is creating a task force in Thailand right now and will be developing a national advisory board on impact investment in the coming year. So what are the specific legislative actions that you would want to prioritize to help make investments in social returns so that we can bring these insights to the forefront of policy recommendations? Thank you.
Like to go ahead?
Yes. So I think I would address just the last question, because the first 2, I think, is a recommendation and it's about issue of taxonomy, if I'm right. So to your first question, how is our policy enabling the government of our policy? Let me put it this way. we are working very hard to comply to the national agenda regarding the sustainable development. So whatever project that the government initiate or private sector initiate, we would definitely invest in those kind of projects, especially for local investment, I mean. So for your second question regarding impact investment, then what you would want to hear is how would be our kind of ideas on those kind of things. I think that would need to be discussed more in detail and not in this forum. But to give you some ideas, I would like to say that we are very much open to any at all that would support investment that contribute to sustainability, taking into consideration that would not reduce or diminish financial returns, because that is our obligation. So we are open to any kind of discussion, any project. Just come to see us and let's talk, and we work together, make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khun Srikanya, and I would like to turn to Asif also to respond.
Thank you. I think the representative from Nepal raised a question about the hydropower project. Is this the one in collaboration with India and Bhutan, or is Nepal doing it itself?
Yeah, there are multiple hydropower projects in Nepal affecting indigenous communities. The one that we are supporting communities in is called Tanahu Hydropower Project, which is co-financed by Asian Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and Japan International Cooperation Agency, as well as KfW, the German agency. But there are also other hydropower projects that are being constructed to export trade to India now, and now they are exporting electricity to India, and in near future they are also aiming to export electricity to Bangladesh. Basically, the question would be like, is the Green New Deal also considering these large-scale hydropower projects that can lead to massive displacement of indigenous communities, and also disruption of this natural cycle of rivers as renewable energy solutions to achieve net zero?
The second pillar talks about building smart, low carbon, water secure and climate resilient cities, infrastructure and mobility, greenhouse gas emissions from construction and operations of urban infrastructure and its activities. Obviously, our region, very much, I'm from Bangladesh, here from Nepal, and we are very much energy starved. And the governments and also the academia, civil society, we have been talking about using the availability of water in the Ganges basin that's coming in from Himalaya to produce clean energy, which is hydro, because most of the power plants in our countries are dependent on coal, which is quite bad for the environment. However, your point is very much well taken. Any development that takes place and as part of the SDG goals, we must also ensure that the rights of all communities, including the indigenous communities, are not affected. If there is a question of compensation, those must also be correctly addressed. So I take your point seriously, and I would like to also mention here that from our task force, after the earthquake that happened in Nepal, we collaborated with the Chaudhary Group of Nepal for post-earthquake rehabilitation. That was a successful project. So what I'm saying is businesses, if they get together with the government, can create some good results. But your point is well taken. Thank you very much. We'll keep it in mind.
I can just also quickly make a call that the Right Energy Partnership my colleague referred to, we are also willing to have partnerships with businesses so that renewable energy development is more rights based. So if there is an opportunity for that, we would also like to discuss that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I just very quickly check with our panelists online, Alberto and Suzanne, whether they would still like to make any comment or response in respect to the interventions that have been made?
Hi, maybe I can contribute a little. I think probably for private sector like us, we need government guidance in terms of what renewable energy, we can have choice, and obviously a unified one. I understand in Chinese mainland it might be differ from different countries, but in Hong Kong, if we can stretch any renewable energy, we'll be very happy. In Hong Kong, currently is less than 1%, but I think in southern China, perhaps solar energy is more viable solution. So we might not have the problem we mentioned. Having said that, we well understood minerals impact, and particularly for us will be aluminium. And for us, apart from thriving for recycled plastic content in our bottles, we actually also look into adding into recycled content in our aluminium cans. Because apart from carbon footprint, we reduce the need for mining for virgin materials. That's how we protect ourselves against finding out a contribution that as a private sector we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Alberto has also come online.
Thank you. I just want to share one thought. I think two of the comments or questions were about the extraction of minerals for the energy transition, and then the suitability of large hydro. And I think, definitely we need to transition towards a zero carbon economy, but we also need to address the other social and environmental challenges that we face, SDGs that were mentioned by some other panelists. And so I think, this is really about rewiring our economy, our development patterns, and I think this has to go hand in hand. And I think this is the challenge that we have, and that I think we collectively need to work towards.
Thank you. We're a little bit over time, so I'm going to wrap it up now. What I take with me as an outcome of this event here today is, as Alberto also just said, challenges are there. But I think we see that there are opportunities for meaningful and scalable actions and targeted investments into the right areas. However, they need to be supported by enabling policy frameworks and innovation, as well as close alignment of objectives and collaboration throughout. With this, let me close the meeting. Thank all of our very distinguished panelists here with me and online. And I wish you all a very good remaining day. Thank you.